Thank you for joining us for the webinar on From the Ground Up, Rethinking Engineering Education for the 21st Century. I'm Susan Adhikari, your moderator for today. The webinar has been organized by Nepal Engineers Association and Madan Bhandari University of Science and Technology Development Board in association with Nepal Engineering Council and Association of Engineering Colleges of Nepal, supported by Nepal Research and Education Network. We have with us Professor Richard Miller as our keynote speaker. Similarly, we have as our panelists Professor Dr. Triratna Bajracharya, President of Nepal Engineers Association, Professor Dr. Rajendra Joshi, Chairperson, Bhandari University of Science and Technology Development Board, ER Dilli Raman Niraula, Chairman, Nepal Engineering Council, ER Arnaraj Silwal, Vice Chairman, Nepal Engineering Council, ER Khemraj Joshi, Registrar, Nepal Engineering Council, ER Lakshman Pokhrel, President, Association of Engineering Colleges of Nepal, Ramesh Resta, General Secretary, Association of Engineering Colleges of Nepal, ER Chabiraj Pokhrel, General Secretary, Nepal Engineers Association, ER Pratap Sapkota, Executive Manager, Nepal Engineers Association. Now we begin with the opening remarks, which will last for 2 minutes per speaker. We start off with Professor Dr. Triratna Bajracharya.
Thank you very much, Susan. Very respected professors, Professor Dr. Richard Miller and Professor Rajendra Joshi, respected the Chairman of Nepal Engineering Council, Dilli Raman Niraula. At the same time, Secretary of Association of Engineering Colleges of Nepal, and there are a lot of respected
Sir, he is muted.
Muted on mute.
Please unmute him.
Sir, your microphone is mute.
Sir, you are muted now.
Okay.
Please unmute your line.
Okay. I myself, Triratna Bajracharya. I'm the president of Nepal Engineers Association. The Nepal Engineers Association is the umbrella organization of all Nepalese engineers. It's around 60,000 engineers are working in Nepal. I work for Tribhuvan University Institute of Engineering and Professor of Mechanical Engineering. It's indeed very, glad to welcome you all in this very, very important, webinar. The topic From the Ground Up, Rethinking Engineering Education for the 21st Century. I like to welcome Professor Richard Miller, who is the founding president of Franklin Olin College of Engineering, USA. So I have been, a lot of, hearing from you, and definitely we will be benefited. Nepalese University will be benefited from this, talk. On behalf of the Nepal Engineers Association, once again, I would like to welcome you and welcome all the participants, panelists, and also viewers on the social media. Thank you very much. Okay, Susan.
Thank you, Professor Bajracharya. Thank you, Professor Bajracharya. I would like to request Professor Dr. Rajendra Joshi to provide opening remarks. Sir, you are muted. Rajendra, sir.
Okay, I have unmuted. Good morning and good evening, all distinguished guests and Professor Miller. We are immensely happy to welcome luminary of engineering education, Professor Miller. I am Rajendra Tod Joshi, electrical engineer by profession. I was Dean of Institute of Engineering. After that, I worked at the World Bank. After retiring from the World Bank, I basically was engaged in education policy reforms. Currently, I am chairperson of Madan Bhandari University of Science and Technology Development Board. We are preparing for establishment of the university, which is envisioned as a world-class research-oriented university. The prime aim of this university is to help as a catalyst for economic growth of Nepal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Joshi. I would like to request Dilli Raman Nirola for his opening remarks.
Namaste, everybody. Sunin sir?
Sunin sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. We are hearing you.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, good evening, whatever, which country we are. All the distinguished personalities. Dr. Millar, I am Dia Nirola, currently chairperson of Nepal Engineering Council. I have served about 32 years in government of Nepal and retired as a superintending engineer from Department of Roads. And after that, I was working as a team leader in one of the project in Tuvan International Airport. After that, the government has given me this responsibility. At the moment, I am the chairperson of Nepal Engineering Council, and we are trying best to accelerate the things and monitoring all the engineering colleges for quality education. And we are revising this Nepal Engineering Council Act 2055. In that revision, we have managed, we have introduced the examination system for the license to the engineers, and this is about to complete. It is in the lower house, and when the house will start, it will be okay soon. So, and other thing, and the council is now at the moment, council is in the rented house. We are very soon publishing a notice to build the council building at New Baneswar DOR complex. The government has sanctioned us 20 annas of land there. So all the activities of engineering council, we are doing betterment for the engineer, and I am very happy that Madan Bhandari Technical University is starting the education system and classes, all faculties, and we are behind of this university. Will support whatever the situation comes, and I am sure that we will be highly benefited by Dr. Millar's this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nirola. Now I'd like to request Lakshman Pokhrel for his opening remarks.
I think Lakshman sir here, representing Econ, me, Ramesh Shrestha, is here. So I will be representing Econ. So, Triratna sir, should I go ahead?
Yes.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So, respected Professor Richard K. Miller, Engineer Dilli Raman Nirola, sir, Chairperson, Nepal Engineering Council, Professor Dr. Rajendra Joshi, sir, Chairperson, Madan Bhandari University of Science and Technology Development Board, Professor Dr. Triratna Bhadracharya, sir, President of Nepal Engineers Association. Namaskar from my side. I am Ramesh Shrestha, General Secretary of Association of Engineering Colleges of Nepal, ECON. I am also working as the principal of Sagarmatha Engineering College, which is one of the affiliated colleges under Tribhuvan University. And it's my privilege to be a part of this very important session representing ECON. I personally thank Professor Triratna Bhadracharya sir for connecting me and ECON to this very important event. ECON is an umbrella organization of all the engineering colleges of Nepal, run specifically from private sector, which always believes in quality education. I hope this event will be a very useful and fruitful on highlighting the different aspects of engineering education for the 21st century. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shrestha. Now I'd like to hand over the floor to Professor Dr. Rajendra Joshi to set the stage for keynote speech.
I would like to begin with the introduction of Professor Richard K. Miller. Professor Miller was born in Fresno, California. He holds bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from University of California at Davis. And he had master's degree in mechanical engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he did PhD in applied mechanics from Caltech. So all the best institution he knows, probably he is perhaps one of the most luckiest persons to be in all these highly ranked universities. He is President Emeritus and Professor of Olin College of Engineering, USA, where he worked for 21 years as founding principal and first employee. Currently, he is also Jerome C. Hongsaker Visiting Professor of MIT, which is very prestigious position. Professor Richard started his career in 1975 as Assistant Professor of Mechanical Engineering and Environmental Engineering. Then he became Associate Professor of Civil Engineering of University of California at South California. And he became Professor of Civil and Aerospace Engineering in 1985 and Associate Dean in 1989. It is very striking. If it was in Nepal, it would have been impossible for a graduate of mechanical engineering to become professor of civil engineering and environmental engineering. We are in very rigid system. So that's how probably system in US differs from system in Nepal or South Asia overall. In 1992, Professor Miller became Dean of College of Engineering in University of Iowa and also Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering. He steered Dean's leadership for 7 years. So having full experience of public education system, he joined as President of Olin College of Engineering 1999, as Professor of Mechanical Engineering and President. And I will talk now about how I came to know Professor Miller. In 2015, I got reference of Olin College of Engineering when we were organizing a seminar on world-class universities in Nepal in 2015. Mr. Dr. Jamil Salmi recommended me to invite a few people. He gave list of 10. I selected 4. Unfortunately, I didn't select Olin College of Engineering. All I did is I looked at ranking of universities and colleges, and that was not at the top. So that was entirely my ignorance. I didn't know about the experiment that was going on Olin College of Engineering. And Jamil Salmi is a very humble person. He didn't insist on anything. He just gave the list, gave this decision up to me. Then afterwards, I started getting interested, and I have found out that I should have invited, of course, Professor Miller. After we started Madan Bhandari preparation for Madan Bhandari University of Science and Technology, I decided this is the time I should approach Professor Miller for his wisdom and advice. And then on 2020, September 12th, I sent a request to Professor Miller if he would be in position to help Nepal in the building a world-class university embossed. On September 24th, we had a 1 hour virtual meeting. It was amazing. I was nobody, I didn't knew him. He took such a great interest that we had 1 hour virtual meeting. That's the first time I met online. And this is the second time I am meeting online. But it almost feels like I know him for years. That's how he is attractive. Now I hope that with this webinar, he will get connected to Nepal very strongly, and Nepal will be in his heart. So I found him very wise, clear thinker, risk taking, full of energy, very helpful, and last but not the least, strong sense of purpose. I would say he is a person of truly exceptional character. Actually, I cannot remember anyone meeting like him. It's not flattering, it's truth. And second thing that is striking is after coming from such luminary universities, he was ready to say that university, engineering education has to be re-engineered. Probably what is being taught in MIT, Harvard, Caltech was not as good as it should be, looking from the perspective of society. So with this courage, he joined Olin College of Engineering, and I would call him innovator. Basically, he's started a new model of engineering. He's pioneer in re-engineering in the education system. And for a country like Nepal, like systems in Nepal or in developing countries, if US education system is rigid and probably not good enough for the 21st century, ours is far from being enough. So I think we will benefit a lot from his exceptional experience and wisdom in this webinar. And I would like to give just one instance. He recently gave a lecture at the MIT, and he said that probably electrical engineering, mechanical civil engineering concept is outdated. Probably we should start a program called bachelor's in engineering and bachelor's. No silos, because silos do not exist in society. In society, problem exists. Problem has to be solved holistically. So with this little bit of background, I would once again like to welcome Professor Miller. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Back to you, Susanji.
Thank you very much. I guess this is my cue to start. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Well, before we begin the slides, let me tell you how warmly I feel welcomed. This is just a very special community. I am so grateful to have an opportunity to talk to you today. I only wish I could visit your beautiful country. I can see the pictures of the mountains behind some of you. It's a gorgeous place. I also want to say it's a great privilege to work with you and to work with other countries who are interested in the future and educating our young people. This is the greatest privilege that we have. As I start, I will need to share my screen. Am I able to share my screen? Let me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can.
Okay, good. Now, let me go back to this and see if I can make this work. Let's see, there it is. And then if I do that, okay, I should be able to make this work now. Let's see, one more button. Great. America, in my view, is spoiled. It has too much opportunity and too much attention. If you look carefully, there are lots of things that are not going well, and I'm hoping you will not just copy things that you see at famous universities. That's one of the big mistakes that I've discovered. I want to just come back to one thing that Professor Rajendra Joshi so kindly mentioned. I was born in Fresno, California, and then raised in a town called Tranquility. It's very quiet there. In fact, Tranquility has only about 650 people. It's 40 miles, I believe, to the nearest hospital. There are lots of farms there. when I was 5 years old, we had 10,000 chickens in the backyard. And none of my family was academics. I could never have imagined going to a major university or being a teacher. So this is where my heart is, in rural environments where people grow up with agricultural backgrounds. It's one of the reasons why I resonate so deeply with your mission in Nepal to create a world-class university there. So let me begin. I'm going to say about 3 things in this talk. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Olin started and what it does. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the lessons learned from Olin, which I think apply everywhere. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about how to start a new institution from a blank sheet of paper, which I believe is a major challenge, sort of a sacred responsibility that happens so rarely, and you need to do all you can to get it right. So those are the 3 things. Now, let me see there. So Olin College. Olin College is a private institution. It was founded by the money generated by Franklin Olin, who was born in the 1860s and was an engineer and an entrepreneur. This is the timeline of the founding of the institution. I highlighted this period in 2001 we called the Olin Partner Year because I want to return to that. This is a time which we spent 1 year in which we had 15 boys and 15 girls who lived in construction trailers on a parking lot while the campus was being built. Why did we do that? These kids were not taking courses. They were partners with us in experimentation. You see, we are engineers and we believe you can learn some things from reading a book, but most of the things you have to learn from experiments. And we needed to do experiments. And in fact, the kind of experiments that you cannot do at Harvard, because these are experiments that are designed to fail for the specific purpose of watching them fail so that you can learn from the outcomes. So that's what we did in the Olin Partner Year. I'm going to return to that, which was probably the most important thing we did in starting the institution. This is the fellow at the Olin Foundation who became so committed that this was needed that he ended the Olin Foundation, which had been in existence for probably 70 or 80 years, and had given hundreds of millions of dollars to different universities. In fact, there are 78 universities on 58 university campuses in America that say Olin on them. This is a big commitment. He committed almost $500 million to starting over. So I felt this great responsibility that you cannot waste this opportunity. You need to get the world's best advice and you need to question all the assumptions. So that's where we started. This was not an uninformed startup. We had lots of advice, including, for example, Dr. Joseph Bordogna, who was the chief operating officer of the US National Science Foundation, and also Dr. John Prados, who was the president of the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology. So these were some of our founding advisors. The purpose of the college is laid out in a document called the Endowment Grant Agreement, and it explains right at the front, Olin College is intended to be different, not for the mere sake of being different, but in order to become an important and constant contributor to the advancement of engineering education in America and throughout the world. Translated, Olin College is intended to become an education laboratory. Now, I've been working hard to try to spread the learning from Olin around the world. This is a big job for a very small place. We have so far been visited by more than 800 universities, 2,500 faculty members from 65 countries in 10 years. We've helped to launch a new engineering school in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I'm helping right now in the UK with the first new institution in 40 years in Western England. We've done work in Singapore, all over the globe. So that's what we do. It's a very unusual mission. We explain it this way. It's as if higher education is this big aircraft carrier, this ship in a harbor, and Olin College, on the other hand, is this little tugboat. Now, the tugboat is built very differently than the aircraft carrier, and we're pushing at 90 degrees to the bow of the ship. Now, the purpose of the tugboat is not to make the aircraft carrier follow it. That's not what you want, but you want the tugboat, which is pushing out of phase with where the institution is going, to reorient the direction of the aircraft carrier, maybe a few degrees to the left, a few degrees to the right. That's the point. So I said the tugboat is built differently. Here's how it's built differently. Olin College has no tenure. We have no academic departments. So we don't have a department of electrical engineering and a department of mechanical engineering. We don't have a physics department and a literature department, a history department, none of that. We just have faculty. Every student gets $100,000 in merit-based scholarships. And in principle, everything at the school has an expiration date, including the curriculum. So it's constantly being experimented with. Lessons learned from experimentation in the Olin partner year. These, I think, are very robust observations that from my travels so far, I believe are true in every continent. Number one, students are much more capable of independent learning than we think. We limit what they're capable of doing by our assumptions that they need too much guidance. Number two, engineering is not a body of knowledge. Let me repeat that if you're from accreditation board. This is not a body of knowledge. Engineering is a process. Our students taught us that when we were watching them during that year. For example, the aircraft industry was created by a couple of bicycle mechanics in Ohio, not at a physics lab at Berkeley. These are two guys who kept jumping off a hill with these wings on their back, saying there must be a better way and trying it until they got it right. That, in fact, is the process of engineering, and we teach too little of that in our schools. We think it's only about knowledge. By the way, working in teams can create a momentum of learning. We seem to spend so much time testing and making sure that nobody can talk to their neighbor because that might be cheating, that we completely stop the momentum of learning. This works, for example, because students are asked to do homework problem sets. They're asked to do them alone. They do them in their bedroom at night. If they get stuck on a problem because of our instructions, they can't talk to their neighbor to find out how to do it. So they just stop and they turn the problem set in. And if they're lucky, a week or two later, they'll get the paper back with some words on it that try to describe what went wrong, if they can even remember what the problem was. But think of what happens if they work in a team. You get stuck on the problem, you can talk to your neighbor, and immediately the neighbor says, oh, when that happened to me, this is what I did. And you build on that, and it continues to move forward at an accelerated pace. The momentum of learning increases in teams. Furthermore, if you change the kinds of problems that you work on, problems that matter to you and matter to society, if you learn them in context, so you don't separate them out into disciplines, and if you collaborate in teams, you can build both competence and a mindset, which is so important for solving the problems today. I'm going to return to this idea of mindset also. None of this is limited to the field of engineering. Now, we're all engineers on this call, but the messages here apply to every university, I think, in any discipline. The last thing we learn from the students is probably the most profound one. It's a redefinition of what it means to be an engineer in the 21st century. When I started in Tranquility, California at high school, which was not a very rigorous high school, my math teacher told me I should be an engineer because I was good at math. Most of us probably will say our mathematics teachers told us that's what we should do. This definition is completely different. An engineer is a person who envisions what has never been and then does whatever it takes to make a better world. Math is in there, in the whatever it takes, but it doesn't start with mathematics. It starts with vision. Vision is so important. If you can't envision what has never been, you'll never be an engineer. You may be an applied mathematician or an applied scientist, but an engineer is a person who makes things and makes a better world. Now, let me talk a little bit about what happened after 20 years. What does the curriculum look like at Olin today? What is the learning environment? How did we come out? First off, 50% of our students are women. This is quite different from the way it is in most engineering schools, even in the US. In the US right now, I think the average percentage of women in undergraduate education is about 18%. Secondly, how do we recruit our students? We look at the grades that they had in high school, sure, and we do have tests that students take, although these are being suspended now because of the COVID virus. We interview them for a weekend, candidates weekend. So the objective of applying to Olin is that you get selected to come for 2 days to spend a weekend with about 75 people you've never met. You're put on teams with these kids. You're asked to design things. You're put in front of a group. You have to explain what you found. You're asked, what are your passions in life? What do you really care about? What are we doing? We're doing what Professor Howard Gardner at Harvard would say, we are seeking multiple intelligences. Turns out that every human has at least 7 independent intelligences. Only 2 of them can be identified on a multiple choice test. Third thing we do, projects. We believe learning in context is really important. And we believe learning in teams. So over a course of 4 years, the students all work on between 25 to 35 design build projects. And they also explore starting and running a business. We're adjacent to Babson College, the US's #1 business school in entrepreneurship, and the kids take courses together. Now, at the end of this 4 years, they do a senior capstone, which is called SCOPE, which is an acronym that stands for something. This is 2 semesters in which they work on a project that's sponsored by a corporate client. So we believe that in education in the 21st century, you don't teach students about engineering, you teach students to be engineers. You can't be an engineer unless you have a project to manage and a client who cares about the outcome. So we seek corporate sponsors for these. Every one of these teams of about 4 to 6 students has sponsorship of $55,000 for the 2 semesters for that one team. They have in the fall, there's a statement of work that's negotiated with a liaison engineer for the company. This is not a project that's just run by the professors. This is a project that's run by the students. So you have to be willing to let them fail. About it once a month, they have to provide a project review for the corporation. If possible, they'll visit the corporation. If not, they do this by Zoom. At the end of the year, we close the entire campus for 2 days. We invite all of the corporate sponsors to come. The students give their final report and show their prototypes for how they've completed their assignment. The principle here is that you succeed if the client tells you they would come back for another project. Now, repeat business. This is the ultimate test. If in principle, if the client is very unhappy with your work, you didn't pass the course. No one has not passed the course so far, although some of them have tried to see how close they could come, I think. Expo. This is one of the responses to the most common complaint about engineering education today, and that is that engineering students do not communicate very well. They tend to be introverted, they tend to be shy, they tend to not get involved in controversy, they tend to not like to stand in front of a group of people. There are lots of jokes about this. One of them is, how can you find the extroverted engineer in the crowd? And the idea is, well, he's the one who is looking at your shoes rather than his own shoes when he talks. That means he's extroverted. How to fix that? So what Olin does, every student at the end of every semester has to stand and deliver in front of the entire community, something of their selection from their project work. This is borrowed from the idea of a music school. If you had a child who was a prodigy on the violin and you sent them to a music academy, you would be disappointed if they didn't play the violin. And if at the end of every semester, you couldn't go and watch them in an auditorium perform in front of a group. On the other hand, maybe some of you played the violin as a child, and you may know the stress and the fear and the anxiety of having to stand in front of other people who can see you fail and perform what you're doing. Well, at Olin, every student does this at the end of every semester. By the time they graduate, they've done it 8 times. They know it's not about the PowerPoint slides, it's about the questions and answers at the end. You have to persuade and convince the audience that you know what you've done. Passionate pursuits. We believe that engineering can be very tedious. It can be very demanding. It can be very analytical. It can be very abstract and disengaged from the things that you care about. So we encourage every student to continue with some passion that they have, it doesn't matter what it is, so that they're continuing to engage their heart and their soul as they're learning and not just their head. Sometimes the passion is what carries you through very difficult times, like COVID, for example. So we've had a number of musicians at Olin. Some of them, for example, get funding from the school for the passionate pursuits to take private lessons at the master class in violin at the New England Conservatory of Music, for example. That's an example of what we do. It could also be learning how to fly an airplane, or could learning how to write a book, or to start a company. All these things are passionate pursuits. The core ideas that we're working with at Olin right now are intrinsic motivation and design thinking. And design thinking is a sort of an artifact that generated out of Stanford, and I'll talk more about that later. Integrated learning in context is probably the three words that best describe the overall position of the curriculum now. Although, as I said at the beginning, don't fall in love with this. Nothing at Olin has tenure, including the curriculum. Everything changes, and we expect that with the expiration date, we'll find better ways of doing this within a couple of years. That's what we're doing today. Design thinking. I'm going to return to this, but this is a method of learning which was pioneered at the D School at Stanford, which we believe has application everywhere. It builds identity, agency, and purpose within students, not just content knowledge. We work with human-centered design. It begins and ends with people. This is a process of design thinking. Empathy and intrinsic motivation are critical to what we're doing. We're trying to develop in students the natural tendency to do something with what they've learned, not to be comfortable with getting an A on a test, but to feel a purpose in life and a sense of commitment to making a positive impact. That's what it means to be an educated person today. How you do that is what is one of this purposes of the design thinking. I'll come back to this later. An engineer is a person who envisions what has never been and does whatever it takes to make it happen, to make a better world. This is a description of what we think engineering is about at this point. Yes, they have content knowledge. Yes, they know something about thermodynamics and electric circuits. That's not who they are. Those are tools. It's like screwdrivers or a hammer or a pair of pliers. What they do with the tools is what that means to be an engineer. So our vision of this is that Olin produces engineering stem cells. And as you know, a stem cell is a biological material that can become anything in your body. It adapts to the world around them. I came up with this vision after watching the graduates of Olin leave. Many of them have, a bachelor's degree in fluid mechanics, and they've published papers in this. What are they doing? If you look at where they go, they may go to medical school immediately after, or they may go to Google and do software development. The application of the specialized knowledge in fluid mechanics appears to be irrelevant to what they're doing. They're actually engineering stem cells. They have this inner passion to make a difference, and they will adapt to wherever they go. Professor Joshi mentioned that Olin was not on the list of the world-class top universities when he made this report a couple of years ago and formed this meeting. It turns out that MIT recently did a global study of the state of the art of engineering education. This is March of 2018. They hired Dr. Ruth Graham in the UK to do it. She interviewed more than 50 experts on many continents and asked them about the state of the art of engineering education. Interesting, in fact, shocking to me and to many of us at Olin, when they did the results, Olin came out #1. We actually had higher confidence in Olin than they did in MIT or Stanford or Aalborg University in Denmark or in the Delft Technical University in the Netherlands, and so on. This was surprising. So Olin has gotten a lot of recognition already in less than 20 years since the institution taught its first classes. Okay, enough about Olin. Let's talk now about what we've learned from this and what might be useful in starting a new institution in Nepal. First of all, let me talk about these general observations about the trends in education. So time is moving from left to right. And first is this concept of the knowledge economy. And I'm sure Professor Joshi is familiar with this. This is the basic concept of the strategic plan for ending poverty that the World Bank uses, preparing people for a knowledge-based economy, rather than, for example, an agrarian economy or an industrialized economy. what is the purpose here? Well, the idea is to be knowledgeable, you have to absorb some content. So education is there to provide content. How do you do that? Well, somebody has to know something before you can transmit the knowledge to someone else. So you need to have a PhD to prove that you know something. And then you become this amazing, omnipotent source of knowledge and information for all of your students. And that's what we call the sage on the stage. So how do you organize the institution? Well, you put people in rows and with seats in them, and they have a blackboard at the front, and the teacher writes on the blackboard and the students take notes. We're all familiar with this. How do you know if it worked? Well, it's what you know that matters. So you give them a test. You might, in the US, we have this very popular TV game, talk show game, which some of you might have heard of. It's called Jeopardy, in which what happens is it's a contest, and when you invite people from the public, and if you're selected, you go on TV, they give you this little clicker in your hand, and they ask you random questions, and if you know the answer first and you get it right, you win money. It's called Jeopardy. And so you might think of this knowledge economy is solved, the whole world is a better place if anybody in the public across the globe can do really well on this Jeopardy game because they know things. But there's a problem with this. It's called Google, okay? I mean, we watch this TV show at our house. It comes on at dinner time most nights. And it turns out that while the contestants are on stage trying to figure out what the answer is and remember things, you can actually Google it on your phone and get the answer before they do. Now think about that. That changes everything. What's the intrinsic value of just knowing things? It's like in the air now. You can get it from your phone. So who cares whether you remember who the president of South Korea is today? So this is making a shift now to the maker economy. So it's not just what you know. We have to be able to make things. Now the goal of education is more complex. It's now putting content in, but there has to be something that comes out. They have to be able to make something, so they watch you do this, they imitate that, and then they learn how to perfect it on their own so that they take ownership of the knowledge and they can do something with it. Now this changes everything. It turns out that the teacher's role is completely different. They're no longer the source of all information who never makes mistakes, and they're in front of the class and everyone worships their omnipotent knowledge. Now they're more of a coach. They're a guide on the side. Often the students are doing things that the teacher doesn't know much about. Not much different from what a project engineer does when they're taking a project that's beyond their own technical expertise and they assemble a team to figure out the answer. They still have to guide the answer. How you organize these people? Well, now being in rows in a large auditorium is not the right thing to do. You put them in small groups of 4 or 5 people around a table and they're making something. They may be making a robot, or they may be writing some software, or they may be writing a book. Turns out that life is a maker project. This skill of working with others to make something new is fundamentally important in all aspects of life. They also are assessed not by what they know, but what they can do. So you remember that scope project where you have a client and the client has to be happy with what you did? That's an example of a maker project. And you need to be able to do that every time. I see this trend happening all over the world. 20 years ago, when I visited universities, they were mostly organizing students in rows in large auditoriums and they gave them tests. Now you're seeing an increased percentage of the time devoted to working on projects in teams. So this is a trend that's happening. It's not the end. There is this innovation economy that's out there in which what's really important is the ideas that come out of kids' heads. This is about original ideas and insights. This is not just about getting the answer on the test. This is in fact not clear how you do this, what role the teachers play. In fact, it might be more important to have the right peers and mentors than it is to have a person with a PhD standing in front of you in the room. This is how Facebook got started. This is how Microsoft got started. This is how Google got started. Maybe you've heard of these companies. Well, how do you organize them? I don't think that matters. I think it's more about intrinsic motivation and design thinking. It's the way they think that matters. By the way, we don't know what the answer is to how you best produce innovators. We're still experimenting, but I'm convinced the classroom that innovators work in looks more like a kindergarten than it does a university lecture hall. There are bright colors on the wall, there are photographs, there are things that inspire the mind, and it is not quiet. You want them to be talking because it's what comes out of them that matters, like a kindergarten. What's the point? It's what you conceive. It's not what you make. Original ideas and insights are the key in the innovation economy. Okay, so there's one set of observations, and it's not new. It turns out that Yeats, decades and decades and decades ago, said that education is not the filling of a pail, which is what happens on the left of this diagram, but the lighting of a fire, which happens on the right. That's where education is headed. Now, education has to change. It can't stay the way it is now. In fact, the clock is running. Some of this may be obvious to you at this point. Let me explain why from this population graph. This is a graph of all of human population throughout all of history of humans on the planet. The striking thing about this is how flat this graph is until just very, very recently, where it shoots up like a rocket. Turns out that there was less than 1 billion people until almost 1900, but by 1927, there were 2 billion. Today, there's about 8 billion. It's going to be 10 billion by 2050. And the last time I checked, the planet is not growing, okay? But the number of people is growing. So this has really changed the world. This is not an accident. The timing of this coincides with the Industrial Revolution and with science and technology. This is, in fact, the impact of what we do as engineers, largely. Certainly the impact of humans and maybe in medicine as well. We can be proud of the fact that human intervention has mattered. It's made a change in the lifespan of people, in the amount of food that's available, even the fact that we've got a vaccine in only months from the time the disease started. These are all artifacts of science and technology. So we're really pleased. But there's a downside to this. If this continues at that rate, the human population will be at risk. This is also an existential threat. This population biology graph has been seen by population biologists for decades. This is not new. If you look, for example, at the population of rabbits in the outback of Australia, after the wolves and the predators are eliminated, what happens? The rest of the story is that the rabbits become extinct because they breed themselves out of existence. There's nothing to eat. They wind up starving to death and fighting with each other. Sound familiar? We're looking at a lot of world stress right now, which is largely the result of this explosion of population, which is an unintended side effect of our impact with technology. So we have a lot of responsibility to think through. By the way, the US National Academy of Engineering began thinking about this in about 2003. In 2008, they published a list of the grand challenges for the 21st century. You might not know these, but you might know what the Sustainable Development Goals are from the United Nations. They're quite similar. The idea is, if we don't do something to change the direction that our planet is headed, our children will not have a life nearly as good as our own. And we have an opportunity to do something about it. Actually, probably not any of us on this call because we won't live long enough, but our children might, and the children of their children. So that's about education. These problems are fundamentally different than the problems that our education system was designed to manage. They're global, they're complex, they're multidisciplinary. Things like security, sustainability, health, and enhancing life. These are all coupled social, scientific, economic, political, even religious problems. Unless the population takes the vaccine, it doesn't matter if you have it. Unless the population believes in climate change and makes a change in their behavior, all the science in the world isn't going to solve the problem. We have to work together across these disciplinary boundaries, across time zones, and across political boundaries. We are now one family. Nepalese children and American children are brothers and sisters. If we don't work together, our whole species is going to be at risk. Thinking like this, a new kind of education for the 21st century is necessary. And that's where we started in thinking about Olin. So let me just stop for a second about the grand challenges. I think, at least in the US, there's been enough discussion about sustainability now. It's taken 20 some years for people to catch on, but climate change is real. This is not a hoax. You can see the data. So many scientists understand this. I don't think we even need to talk too much about it. Global health. We talked about global health in pandemics for 20 years. We couldn't get people's attention. Along came COVID. And now suddenly people say, oh, global health is a problem too. We need to prepare for this. We need to prepare the next generation. By the way, pandemics work at a much shorter time scale than climate change. Climate change may take a century. It's very hard to manage the momentum of an entire planet's climate. But as you can see with the global pandemic, if the disease were more lethal, in 2 or 3 years, the human species could be gone entirely, and then climate change wouldn't matter. Exponential change is something the public doesn't understand. Security. This is one that we keep talking about and the people still are not thinking. What is this about? Social media, for example, cybersecurity. There's a lot going on here. If you're not aware of these books, you should begin to look at them. What the internet is doing to our brains by Nicholas Carr talks about the impact of spending so many hours looking down at your phone rather than looking in the eyes of your neighbor. I know people actually who were on the faculty at Olin, husband and wife team, who when they were in bed at night, texted each other. I mean, they could talk to each other. They're sitting right there. What's wrong with that? It turns out that you're also wiring your brain so that it has a capacity for memory of about 140 characters, which fits Twitter. People don't read books now. There's a lot of things to be concerned about, unintended consequences. And on a different scale, Shoshana Zuboff, who is at Harvard Business School, has written a stunning large book about the age of surveillance capitalism. We'll come back to that. There's also military implications of this, the perfect weapon of being able to intervene in the internal affairs of another country without ever having soldiers there, just by invading their confidential software, which is possible to do from a distance. We're worrying about that in the US elections. If it's happening in the US, it's happening everywhere. The unintended consequences. So let me be clear about this. Science is not bad. Science has more responsibility. There is a medical technology called CRISPR. Maybe some of you have seen this, CRISPR. It's a gene splicing and editing program. This was designed by physicians who were worried about very rare genetic diseases among young children. And they thought, wouldn't it be marvelous if we could just come up with a tool that would allow us to edit the genes of babies to prevent these genetic diseases from ever coming into existence. So they invented this tool. And then they sat back and looked at, wait a minute, this is actually a very easy tool to use, and it could be used for other things besides healing genetic diseases. It could be used, for example, by military people to create a whole race of individuals who can fight on the battlefield without stopping, even if their arms or legs got shot. There are people who less negative consequences who just want their children to be brilliant. So they would like to, and they only want children who are over 6 feet tall. They only want them to have blue eyes. They only want them to have perfect SAT scores, and you sort of engineer them. What kind of a world is this going to? Unintended consequences of software and AI are going to be a major challenge in the future. Finally, enhancing life. We all want our children to have a life at least as good as ours. The real problem with that graph that I showed you is that the population is exploding. And the problem will be, how do you control poverty and the equitable distribution of wealth when the population is going through the roof? Okay, so these are all things at 100,000 feet in the air. How do we bring this down to education and what's happening in universities? And I'm going to claim that our traditional approach to higher education may actually be preventing us from producing innovators. There's lots of books about this. So first of all, let me talk about innovation, because it's probably the most overused and least understood word that we have. Creativity is the process of generating original ideas and insights. Inventiveness is the process of generating original ideas and insights that have value, because creativity can just be hallucination. I mean, arts do that. Inventiveness is about making something, so it has to have some value. And innovation is the process of creating things with value, but then also implementing them in ways that change the way people live. So when I'm talking about innovation, I'm talking about making a difference in the world in ways that people change. In fact, a profound innovation is one that happens to be so profound that no one can remember life before it was introduced. Now, in the US, there are lots of examples of this, and many of them are around the world. Many of my children can't imagine how the caveman must have lived before we had cell phones, so that you could just, text your grandmother. Also, what about the automobile? Many people don't have automobiles or never imagined that they would exist. Or the credit card. And a lot of countries don't even have cash now. Everything is done by a credit card or by a phone. These are innovations that change the world. Okay, how do we create innovations of that scale that change the world in ways that address the global grand challenges? Things like cybersecurity or pandemics. You need people and you need ideas who can think in ways that create change on that scale. So this might be a map of a major university in the US. Let me just pick on one, like the University of Michigan. It's a very large place. If you go there, you'll find that there's a certain area. Let's talk about this blue circle in the upper left, which is the engineering school. And there are all these buildings, usually arranged in kind of a circle or a quad, a square, rectangle, they call the engineering quad. And there's a building that says electrical engineering. There's a building that says mechanical engineering, and so on. And the students who enroll in engineering in Michigan spend, I'm going to say 75% of their time going to those buildings. And they don't even go to the buildings on the rest of the campus. This is almost engineered into their time because the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology says 75% of the courses they take have to be in the engineering and science. If you sit in the back of the room and you watch what we teach in engineering and science, I'm going to claim it has a purpose, and it has a single-minded purpose. It's what I call feasibility. Almost every person that stands in an engineering school talks about one thing. What do we know about natural law, and what does it tell us about what we can do to make things? All about natural law. So 4 years of this gives you a lens of interpreting the world through a telescope which only sees things that are feasible. And by the absence of any other questions, we assume those are the most important questions in life. By the way, over to the right, there's a green circle. This is the business school. And the students who enroll in business at Michigan will spend half of their time in that circle. And they'll be taking a different kind of course, courses that deal with accounting, that deal with management, and deal with entrepreneurship or law. These are all courses about viability. Every teacher that stands in front of them has a PhD in business, and they only talk about one thing. What do you have to do in order to generate money? What are the legal things you have to do? How much startup capital do you need? What do you do to sustain it and keep clients involved? Their lens on the world is viability, and they see everything in the world through this lens of viability. Does it generate money or not? And apparently nothing else matters. On the other hand, there's this red circle down at the bottom where students major in other things like psychology and arts and humanities. They have a very different way of thinking about the world. They're looking at questions like, what is the meaning of truth? Or what is the meaning of beauty? Or what is the meaning of love? Or today, what is the meaning of justice? Now, these are important concepts. Do you think they're important? These are the things that, in fact, determine what people do with their lives, the most important things to them. The other things, the feasibility and viability, are just ways of achieving what you want to do. This is what you want to do. They study human desire. Now, what's the significance of this? Well, the significance of this is, if you think about innovation, if you think about an innovation, a credit card, an automobile, a new vaccine, you'll find there isn't a single one that's been profoundly effective at changing the way people live unless it isn't simultaneously feasible because nothing happens in the real world that isn't actually feasible, and also viable because nobody will care if they can't afford it. And this also be desirable so that they'll choose this among all the other options they have in their life. Has to be all three. But the way we're educating people is to pull these things apart and make them completely oblivious to the existence of the other things. The observation, no amount of emphasis on narrow specialized courses is going to produce the innovators we need. They'll produce technicians, but they won't produce innovators. Now, the 21st century requires innovators, but it requires people with more than specialized knowledge. In fact, attitude plays a huge role. More often than not, your attitude determines your altitude in life, not your aptitude. In spite of the fact that we focus almost entirely on aptitude in universities, this attitude thing is huge. This is what we're hearing from companies. In fact, this quote, "Motivation almost always beats raw talent," appeared in 2016 in the Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine. It's a quote from Norm Augustine, the former CEO of Lockheed Martin, one of the largest military defense contractors in the US. That's the tip of the iceberg. Lots of different companies, the STEM Connector, IBM, have been telling us for decades, pay attention to attitudes, behaviors, and motivations, or mindset. What are they saying? They're saying you need these kinds of attitudes and behaviors. These attitudes and behaviors, by the way, have a very long lifespan. Understanding the latest paper in turbulence theory in fluid mechanics is a very short lifespan. In 5 years, there'll be another one. Collaborative mindset, entrepreneurial mindset, an interdisciplinary mindset, a global mindset, and an ethical mindset. These are the kinds of things that we're hearing from them. It's not just about content knowledge. If you're going to produce engineers who change the world in the 21st century, you have to pay attention to this. By the way, when I first ran into this, I began to worry because, I'm an engineer like you, and mindset sounds like a kind of popular thinking you might see on a book in an airport that you read on the way, sort of self-help that you read on a flight that you're going to New Delhi or something. Turns out it's real. This is Professor Carol Dweck at Stanford. In 2016, she won the Atkinson Prize at the National Academy of Science. She studied what works in education in young people. And one of the things that she found, which is, I think, really profound now, what you believe about yourself is a really good predictor of how you will achieve in life. If you believe, for example, that the ability to learn things and to excel is part of your intelligence, and if intelligence is something you inherit from your parents, like your eye color or how tall you are, you can't do anything about it. So if this is the way you believe, then this is called a fixed mindset, and the world is kind of flat. You worry that if you try something too hard, it'll be beyond your genetic ability to do this and you'll fail. Like basketball in the US is a sport for tall people. And if you're a short person, you wouldn't even consider going to play basketball because you will not win. And so if you think that you're not smart because your parents weren't, you won't even attempt to be a mathematician or an engineer. But what Carol found was that you can change this. If you think of your intelligence not as something you inherited that's fixed like your eye color, instead, if you think of your intelligence as a muscle that you can grow by exercise, this is called a growth mindset. And students who believe that, she can demonstrate for 25 years of experience to always grow and get better, and they get closer and closer to being world class at what they do. Isn't that what we want to do in higher education? She's not alone in this. Angela Duckworth at the University of Pennsylvania has written a book called Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. This is another attitude, and not just that I can get better by practicing, but also I'm not going to give up. These are outgrowths of some work by James Heckman at the University of Chicago, Nobel Prize winner in economics. What did he do? He showed by mathematical evaluation of the tax records of millions of people in the US that grit or determination or the unwillingness to quit is often a better predictor of success in life than knowledge or intelligence. What he's saying is the same thing that Norm Augustine said a couple of minutes ago. that he will take motivation over raw talent any day in the employees that he finds in his company. So how do you do that? Turns out this is my undergraduate advisor at the University of California at Davis. He is the first person with a PhD and the first person who's an engineer that I ever met coming from the farm. Mel taught me that hopeful faculty members spread hope among their students, but cynical faculty members spread cynicism. Every time you walk into a classroom and you pick up a piece of chalk, you're not just teaching calculus, you're shaping the mindset of the young people that are in that classroom. I also found later, Mel died of brain cancer a couple of years ago, and his wife is a dear friend of ours. He in this service that we had for him, we found out that Mel was also a coach, literally an Olympic jumping coach. Several of his people that he mentored won Olympic gold medals in long jump. He believed that you could encourage people, you could shape their attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs in ways that got more performance out of them and they got more success out of it. Nobody is born to win a gold medal in the Olympics. It takes an enormous amount of passion, perseverance, and trial and error. Now, let me shift gears a little bit. Lessons from the COVID experience, because people always are asking, well, what changed about all this as a result of COVID? Well, learning is not a place, but an activity, just as we're doing on this call right now. Remote learning can be very effective, but it depends on engagement. If it's a completely passive thing that you can be doing your email and eating dinner at the same time, it's not going to produce much change in you. It requires engagement, focus. Remote learning poorly addresses things like social and emotional objectives, belonging, teamwork, the work of Angela Duckworth. Making and building online, building a prototype that you would hold in your hand is not something that you can do easily over the internet. And we're still struggling with that. I've not seen anybody who does a good job of that. And finally, if you have to do everything online so that nobody's in the same room, then there's a huge variability of the conditions in the room that you're in. Some students don't even have access to the internet, so they get no input. Others have 6 siblings living in the same room, and there's a lot of distraction and noise in the room. Others have tutors and wealthy parents who are very concerned about getting their education right. So it amplifies the inequality of the learning environment. So these are the short lessons that we've learned from COVID. But honestly, I think these we will learn about and we will figure out how to manage. There are bigger lessons that I'm more worried about. Because of the way the world responded to COVID, I am worried about much bigger issues. The need for critical thinking. Almost every university tells you that now that you're in the university, your life will be better because we'll teach you to be a critical thinker no matter what subject you study. Critical thinkers are the people that employers like, and they'll always give them the leadership job. So even if you majored in history, doesn't matter, give it 10 years and you'll still be the president of the company because we teach you to be critical thinkers. But look at what you're seeing in response to the COVID thing. All of these ridiculous conspiracy theories. It's almost as if you're reading a comic book as a child and you're seeing that people from Mars have invaded the planet and they have this plan to change the world. And there's absolutely no evidence. Apparently, we are not doing very well at preparing the population to reject ridiculous conspiracy theories and to be critical in their thinking. We have to do better. The importance of truth. It matters whether things are true. If you have a leader who stands up and says things that are not true constantly, we know from psychology, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes accepted as sort of true by a lot of people. A lot of psychological work in this. If I hear one more time a student tell me when I'm under questioning, well, a lot of people agree with me, and this is my evidence that I'm right, I think I'm going to jump off a bridge. This is ridiculous. Truth is not about how many people agree with you. You know that as a scientist. It's about evidence, and it's about repeatability of the evidence in different environments. And of course, there's this disregard for science in the scientific process. These are big red lights on the dashboard. We have to do better in higher education to address these things. And I think it's education's responsibility to get this right. What really matters in higher education? Suppose you could change anything. What do we want for our children? This is very hard to get data on, but I found some data with a number of colleagues on how this works. It turns out, and I know we're at just about an hour, so there's going to be maybe another 10 minutes of this before Q&A. I hope you can hang in there. This is data from Gallup with Purdue University as a partner. Gallup is a large political polling organization in the US. They did a survey of alumni of major universities. Now I think there's 100,000 alumni from hundreds of different universities. It's based on behavioral economics with long-term outcomes. They're looking for what they call well-being. This is not just your financial wealth. This is about your sense of purpose in life, your sense of social belonging to a community, your sense of responsibility for your own health, leading a healthy lifestyle. What did they find out? By the way, this is published in a lot of places. This is the simplest one for me. It's called The Real Data Revolution in Trusteeship Magazine. Key findings. I was kind of hoping as an engineer, maybe you would too, if the students had taken courses in free body diagrams and they got an A in it and they were really good in their calculus class, that everything worked out well. Their life was just perfect and they were very happy. Turns out that's not what they found out. Okay, what they found out is that people who reported some degree of mentorship and some degree of projects and learning which made the classes real doubled their success in life, even 40 years after they graduated from school. But only 3% of the alumni said they got that. So we have a lot of work to do. What they said, someone cared about me as a person. And also college is not just about books and tests, it's about life. I'm dealing with real problems and real people. If they said those two things, it doubled their outcomes in life. And I want to return to this in a second. You remember that course in design thinking that we were talking about? Here's how you can do this in a course that every student needs in engineering. We have this course called User-Oriented Collaborative Design. And what we do is we bring students into the very first day of class in small groups of 5. And we ask them one question. Identify a group of people whose lives you want to change. Not someday, but in the next 4 months. Okay, and we listen. And just to give you context, I'll walk you through a case study, which is slightly fictionalized in order to make it fit into the time we have. A young lady said, my grandmother now has Alzheimer's disease. We visited her at the holidays. She doesn't live at home now. She lives in a hospital, and I want to do something to improve the lives of the elderly. So we said, that's great. Let's find 10 elderly people living in assisted living facilities within a 10-minute drive of Olin College. And then in the next 2 weeks, you will go visit them one at a time, and you'll interview them for 2 hours about what does it mean to be elderly in America today. And then you'll come back and you'll brainstorm about what you found, and you'll propose 2 or 3 things that would change their lives. That was the plan. They heard from these elderly people. All of them had a friend who had fallen and broken a hip. In some cases, the hip did not heal. And now for the rest of their life, they're confined to a wheelchair. And they're very afraid of that. And at first they didn't understand. And then they learned. They said, well, if you're in a wheelchair forever, several things happen. Number one, you can't look people in the eye. They always look down on you, and you can only look at their belt buckle. You feel unequal. Secondly, when people come to visit you, they congregate above your head and they talk to each other, and they talk about you in the third person. It's like you're a problem now. You're not a real person anymore. You lose your humanity. This is why they were so upset. And they also said there's some secondary things. If you can't walk anymore, you can't burn calories, and so you can't manage your metabolism. You can't control your weight. In fact, you can't even tell how much you weigh. So what did they do? They came back and they had taken notes on these little sticky notes, little quotes that they'd heard people say, and they arranged the quotes all over the wall and put them in themes so they could see what they'd heard collectively. And they said, look, we're only 19 years old. I don't think we're going to fix the aging thing today. That's too complicated. But maybe we can do something about the weight. So they brainstormed. And they said, what if we design a little carpet that has pressure sensors under it, and you could drive your wheelchair onto the carpet, and the little Pressure sensors have RFID radio transmitters that would send the data to your iPhone. There's an app in the iPhone that subtracts out the empty weight of the chair, and it tells you today, Professor Joshi, you weigh 120 pounds, okay? Would that be of any use to you? They went back and they talked to these people in the nursing home, and they said, number one, you listened to me. I'm amazed. You heard me. You heard what I had to say. Number two, I think this is amazing. Can you actually make one of these things? They came back and they're on fire now. And they said, I don't care. We've not had any courses in pressure sensors or data transmission. Who on this campus knows anything about this? I want to go have lunch with them. I want to learn everything they know. No courses. This is what we call intrinsic motivation. So within a couple of months, they built one. They now have a prototype. It's not very fancy, but it has all the parts that work. The next course in the curriculum, how to start and run a business. They now have a client group. They have a product that the client group tells them would change their lives. All they need to do is to figure out how do you manufacture it? What's the price point? What are the legal issues involved? They entered the business plan competition at Babson across the street. They won first place. They came home with $10,000. They started a business in their dormitory. And before the end of the year, they were selling them. They're called lily pad scales. You can find them online today. Two of the kids postponed going to graduate school in order to continue this company until it was harvested. The point of this story is identity, agency, and purpose. Number one, you can't spend 20 hours talking to people in a nursing home without building a sense of empathy. You build a sense of bond, a connection. Engineering, at its heart, is about self-expression, like the arts. It has to come from inside of you. You build a sense of empathy and a sense of belonging to the people that you ran into. Secondly, you wind up coming home without the benefit of course or even knowing who to talk to, and in several months you build one. This is a sense of agency. If you can do this on your own, if you can find your way to build things, if you're compassionate and you're driven from inside, that builds a sense of agency. Number three, when you get through with it and you bring this product back and you show it to the people, the smile on their face, the sense of tears in their eyes of joy that you cared about them, builds a sense of purpose. You're only 19. I can already change the world. I can imagine people who need benefit. I can bring these ideas. I already know I don't need a PhD. I don't need to be in a world-class university. I can do this right now. That changes who you are. Here's my point. A good education, which you can get by copying the curriculum somewhere else, changes what you know. But a great education changes who you are. And it's that who you are that is fundamentally important to changing education in the 21st century. Okay, I'm going to switch gears to the third part and go through this very quickly. What if you wanted to start a new university from a blank sheet of paper? What are the issues you should be thinking about? Well, I'm going to say two things. World-class universities are always the result of world-class people. Don't ever lose sight of that. Your university will never be better than the people you have in it. Secondly, this is a quote from Charles Vest, who was the former president of MIT and the president of the National Academy of Engineering in the US. Making universities and engineering schools exciting, creative, adventurous, rigorous, demanding, and empowering milieus is more important than specifying the curricular details. What's that about? That's about the culture. So world-class universities have two things, people and culture. Now let's talk about this. What kind of culture? Well, it's a culture that's driven by intrinsic motivation, which is academic freedom, shared vision, and a higher calling. People do things not because they're told to do them. They do things because they're driven to do them by this passion from inside. Like the kids who went to the nursing home, they couldn't stop thinking about how to help these people. It's a higher calling, something more important than self. Core values and a respect for others. That's what you need. At Olin, we measure this by what the students tell me at the water cooler. I often hear this. I've never worked this hard in my life, and there's nothing I would rather be doing. That's so rare to hear both of them. In fact, there's a college guide that's published in the US called Princeton Review. They rank universities all across the country in many different things. Olin has often appeared on 2 of the top 20 lists in the country. Number 1 is students never stop studying. Olin is not a party school. It's often been in the top 5 in the US for students never stop studying. But they're also on the top 20 list of having the happiest students in America. How can you do that? How can you be so committed to working very, very hard and at the same time being happy because you're working on something that matters to you? College is not about books and tests, it's about life. Never worked this hard at anything, and there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. That's the culture you want to look for. This is explained, by the way, in a book by Daniel Pink called Drive. It's about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. There's a really simple, like 10-minute video that explains the purpose of the book, which I highly recommend. You can find it on Google. Here's some examples of companies in the US that have a culture of innovation built in. And I could describe this, how each company does it. From Google, that has free food and cafeterias. They don't monitor the days when the students come and go or when the employees come and go. They want them to be so committed to working for the company, they just don't leave. They're there at 10 o'clock at night. 3M has a long history of having people switch from one division to another. They work on problems that they have no background in. This is like having a university that has no departments. Now, starting new universities. The most common mistake, I said we've been visited by 800 universities in 20 years. Many of them are from other countries, 70% of them actually, and most of them are trying to start a new university, like was happening in Nepal. Number 1 mistake, don't think that copying the curriculum at a university in another country is going to produce the same result. It's not about the curriculum, it's about the people and the culture. So so don't pay somebody a lot of money to copy their textbooks and their lecture notes. I mean, look, MIT does this for free. You know, the open courseware project at MIT, you can see what they're teaching anything. Don't pay anybody for that, it's free. And don't think that because you can download the course notes from MIT's calculus class that you're gonna get the same result in Nepal. You have a different student population. Number 2, whatever you think it will cost to build this university, double it. You'll be wrong. I'm guaranteed. It'll cost more than you think. You won't be right if you double it, but you'll be closer. Number 2, however long you think it will take to make this happen, double that too. It takes a lot longer. I have lots of stories about that. Don't rush to open the campus. Experiment first. The opportunity to start with a blank sheet and to get it right is so rare. It's even going to happen very often. It's precious. Waiting a few months to get it right is better than getting it done on time and regretting it. And finally, don't forget, it's the quality of the people that's more important than the plan that you started with. The temptation is to write it down and say, this is what we'll do. But you should pay attention instead to the quality of the people you're attracting. The plan is only there to attract the right people. What are the characteristics of world-class universities? There's a paper by Henry Rozovsky, the former dean of faculty and briefly the president of Harvard University, explaining why it is that if you look at the Times Higher Education poll of world-class universities, it's dominated by universities in the US. What is it about them? I mean, do they just have smarter people? No. There are 6 characteristics of world-class universities that he identifies. Number 1 is shared governance. That means that the board of trustees doesn't make all the decisions and then hand them down to the faculty. There is a shared conversation in which everybody nods heads. Yes, this is the best way to go about it. Number 2, academic freedom. You don't persecute people for coming up with ideas that don't fit your political views or your initial ideas about what should happen. People do their best work because they're free to follow those passions from inside. Merit selection. You pick people because there are reasons why, multiple intelligences or tests, but there is a merit that's involved. Number 3, significant human contact. It's not about distance learning. This is not just about sitting back in a Zoom. You have to spend time in the same room together. You have to become soulmates. Preservation of culture. It's not just about science and math. There's a culture in Nepal which is precious. The people who have lived there for centuries have developed a set of values, a set of cultural beliefs. You don't want to discard those and replace them with what you found at Carnegie Mellon University instead. Build on them. They are the strength of your people. These are the ideas that made your country great as to what it does already. Don't throw them out. Include humanities and social sciences as an important part of the education that you provide. Finally, nonprofit status. Universities are not about making money off of others because there's a demand for it. Who's responsible for attracting the people and building this culture? Well, it starts with the president. For the presidents, I would say, establish and live your core values. The first thing we did at Olin, before we'd even recruited everybody, is to write down a set of 5 core values. Number 2, create a shared vision. There is to be a short statement of why you exist that's inspiring. Number 3, let your passion infect others. Don't be introverted. Don't be shy. Tell them why it is that you care about this place, why it is more important to you. It's not a job. This is a calling in life. It's a cause. It's why I'm alive today. Number 3, attract the right people into your leadership. Get the right people on the bus and get them in the right seats. Really critically important. If you don't get the right people at the beginning, you've wasted the opportunity to start a new institution. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. I think Gandhi had this right. The kind of leader that you want to build an institution that's world-class is one that's inspiring. By the way, leaders can't create excellence from the top, and neither can a board, but they can sure stop it, often without even knowing that they're stopping it, because of the signals that they're sending. What they think is important and who they criticize matters. Now, what's the primary role of governance? The board of trustees, for example. Defining the purpose and the goals of the university. That's the purview of the board. They have to make sure that there's a purpose for this institution, that it has a set of reasonable goals, and that it meets those goals. Recruiting and supporting the president. That's probably the most important job that they have. Assuming fiduciary responsibility for all the assets. That means that they make sure that what they do with the assets is in the best interest of the university, not in the best interest of any of one of us on the board of trustees or any faculty member or employee of the university, but the students who are not yet born are going to benefit from the decisions that we make in this boardroom. We need to create a culture of gratitude and philanthropy. The best universities all have a commitment to the future and to philanthropy, to preserve the intergenerational equity in all forms. That's partly the endowment, but it's also the people and the reputation of the institution. Does governance manage the university? This is like the first question that comes up in the boardroom. And the answer is no, the governance does not manage the university. The leadership team manages and the trustees govern. But wait a minute, if governance isn't management, then what is it? Well, governance is not the same thing as management, and it's not the same thing as leadership. They're 3 different things. Leadership, the president, his job is to do the right thing. You need to be somewhat arm's length from the fight over the budget and over the concerns about political implications. You need to think in the future and do the right thing. Even when it's not popular, you bring the truth to the board. Management. This is the leadership team, the chief operating officer, the provost, the deans. They do things right. There is a way to do this, which is fair, which is legal, which is moral, which is ethical. They carry out the implementation of the plans. The governance is involved in oversight. Oversight is to ask questions. There is no end to the appropriate questions that the governance can ask. They have a concern, bring it up. And you judge the judgment of the president. Don't tell them what to do, but you ask them to explain why they're doing it. When there is consistent failure to meet expectations, you change the leaders. That's what boards do. This little picture reminds me that almost always boards of trustees are filled with people who are very successful in their careers. They're usually successful in business because those are the people that have resources and influence. What happens in business to do really good, you have to understand budgets and you have to understand schedules and what the products are. So every project decision that you make has 3 implications. One has to do with quality, one has to do with cost, one has to do with speed. But in a higher education, at least in the US, the predominance of people on the board don't come from the industry of higher ed. They come from the industry of making products. So they don't actually understand the difference between a high quality classroom experience and an average classroom experience. So judging the quality is difficult. So instead, they focus on cost and speed. Those decisions driven by cost and speed will prevent you from achieving quality in the end. Let me explain it this way. The one person that I got at the very beginning to help advise me at Olin, who no longer is alive, is the founding president of Harvey Mudd College, which is an absolutely spectacular science and math college in Southern California. His name is Joe Platt. And Joe told me right from the beginning about how they started the institution. Very practical question. The Board of Trustees asked Joe, how many students are you going to have in the first class? We need to know that because we need to know how many teachers, how many seats we need in the classrooms, how many laboratory setups, all of this. He said, I won't answer that question. If I can tell you exactly how many students there are, then I have no idea what the quality will be. Because if you just say, we're going to have 100 students, then you fill the 100 seats with the best students that you can find, but you have no idea what their test scores are or what their quality is. He says, don't ask me that question in 5 years. Instead, tell me what will be the quality of the incoming students. Their test scores will always be in the top 10% in the US. Okay, if you do that, I have no idea who's going to apply. So I can't tell you how many students there'll be. So we'll have to live with the uncertainty with cost and the uncertainty with speed because we're giving priority to the quality of the students. I'm almost at the end, okay? I know we're running down on, and so please forgive me, but I think this is important to hear. There's a big difference in the expectations for board behavior in a private corporation and in higher education. And this is my US context. Number one, in private corporations, it's quite common for the CEO, the president of a company, and the chair of the board to be the same person. I know this. I have a brother who is a CEO of a significant internet company in Silicon Valley, and he's been through a number of these transitions. Sometimes there's good reason for that. But in higher education, the chair cannot be the CEO and vice versa. They have to be independent because you're looking for oversight. You can't be oversight if you're the same person. Secondly, the CEO and the chair in a corporation often have financial ownership. I mean, it's a private company. It may be owned by 3 people. And one of them is both the chairman and the president of the company. So they can decide tomorrow they're going to sell the company and everybody else just goes along with it. That's the way it works. On the other hand, in higher education, no one in governance can have a financial conflict of interest by regulation. What does this mean? You must avoid even the perception of self-dealing if you're going to earn the public trust. This is, if I understand this correctly, the new University in Nepal is going to serve all the people in the country. It's a public trust that you care about. Finally, the role of philanthropy. Strongly encourage this. Private universities in America expect philanthropic engagement of the board and all members of the community. Harvard, Yale, MIT, Stanford, every school that you can see on that list has a very generous board of trustees. So they're not paid to be on the board. They're in fact expected to make a gift to be on the board. How ridiculous is that? Well, this is an action of the heart. This is not something that you do for a job. Why do they do this? Well, obviously it produces some resources, but not a large fraction of the college. It establishes a culture of passionate personal commitment. You're committed to something greater than self. If the board is committed at that level, how can the faculty not be committed at that level? The difference is clear in the institutional performance. Look at the Times Higher Education ranking of universities in the top 25. Almost all of them are private and they're driven by philanthropy on their board. In summary, to make a world-class university takes exceptional people, takes academic freedom and culture of innovation. A president sets expectations and a vision. The leadership team manages the implementation. The governance provides oversight and support, and they develop a culture of philanthropy and gratitude. A dynamic, complex ecology of excellence. So that's all you have to do. It's pretty simple, right? No, it's not simple. It's really difficult, and you have to be lucky, among other things, to get it right. There are a number of books that you can read about this that will provide more background. Okay, this has been a very long talk. I'm sorry for taking so much time, but I wanted to get as much content in there as I could that might be useful to you. So at this point, I will stop and stop sharing my screen. And if anybody is still awake, I would be glad to answer questions. And now I can
Thank
see
you,
that you
Professor
can't see
Miller,
me.
for an insightful speech. Now we have entered the Q&A session. We'll address some of the questions, queries in the Q&A box, given the time constraints. Do you have any questions? Please type on the Q&A section, please.
See, I told you people fell asleep.
We have a question from Sagar Regmi. Yes. So I wonder why the curriculum of one country does not work in another country in the area of science and engineering. Sagar Regmi from Mandari University of Science and Technology Development Board.
Obviously, that's a very good question. We think of education as being sort of modular. If you learn this skill, then you should be able to put a check in the box and do something the same as another person. But here are some examples. I mean, so I did some work in Kazakhstan for the World Bank in helping them think about an education there for what is now Nazarbayev University, but was earlier had a different names. And it's had some changes in leadership. And they thought, we want the world's best, say, computer science department. So let's go to Carnegie Mellon University in the US. They're very well known for this. Or if we want engineering, let's go to UCL in London and let's give them a check and have them deliver the textbooks and the curriculum, and we'll install it and then we'll get the same curriculum. We'll get the same outcome. What could go wrong with that? Number one, the students are not the same. Okay, in fact, almost every place that I've seen when you're starting a new university, the curriculum in the US is built on the capabilities of the graduating high school seniors in the US. So they may have more mathematics background, they may have had a different ability to read and write than the students in another country. I also was involved in the creation of the new university in the United Arab Emirates, in Abu Dhabi, in fact, Khalifa University of Science, Technology, and Research, KUSTAR. So what did they find? They found out when they started implementing it, they had to create an extra year in the beginning for the incoming students who grew up in Abu Dhabi who were not up to speed in learning how to learn in a college environment. They had a transition problem in going from their K-12 school into the first year of a university curriculum. So they took them 5 years for those students. This is very common. And as a result of that, the teachers also, you can only teach what you know, okay? If you have not yourself developed this curriculum, you don't actually have the same depth of understanding of why students will have a question at part one that they can't answer in part two. And you also have different cultural values. I remember when I was teaching at Southern Cal in Los Angeles, which has more international students than any other country, any other university in the US. I was teaching a class, very basic class in structural mechanics. I think probably all of you do this, a course in statics and strength of materials. And it had something like 400 students in it, lots of different TAs and section leaders. And it turns out that depending who the section leader was has a high correlation with how well the students did. Some section leaders, some teachers, in other words, were not as good at motivating and preparing students as others. I also found that the students' attitudes were quite different about cheating and about your own work. I had TAs come to me and say, these two students turned in the same homework and it's wrong. I know it's wrong because they said 2 + 2 is 5. How do we deal with that? And you call them into your room and you ask them who did this work. It's easy to find out. You put them on the blackboard and one of them can explain and the other one can't. Okay, I copied it from this other student. If you do that again, you will not be able to pass this course. But in their country, that's not the way it works, okay? The level of understanding of what fairness means is different in different cultures. That doesn't mean that one culture is good and the other culture is bad. It means it's different. You have to deal with it. There's also the problem of being comfortable standing in front of a group and talking. Today, there's a great deal of concern about students' mental health as they come in. Harvard just did a study on the future of higher education, 2,000 interviews on 10 campuses over 7 years. The number one concern of college students in America today is belonging, a sense of psychological belonging and acceptance of your peers. Remember, they are teenagers. The hormones are beginning to start, understanding the relationship with people who the opposite sex or people who might be a life partner is beginning to awaken in them, and they're managing this at the same time as they're trying to learn how to integrate by parts in the calculus class. There are lots of evidence that what works in one country doesn't work in another. By the way, if you're from a corporation and you're struggling with this, it's very common for one company to acquire another company. In fact, in the US, a really simple example of this is that Boeing Corporation makes airplanes, acquired Northrop Grumman, McDonnell Douglas Corporation a few years ago. They just bought them. Turns out that the rules that work in Boeing don't work the same within the population of people who work at McDonnell Douglas. Big problem with values and with habits and with organization. So what I would recommend instead of just copying is do the experiment that we did, the Olin Partner Year. Extend the time for building your program a little longer. Take 6 months at least, maybe a year. Get a small sample of the students from your own population and have them work closely with the faculty to see what the limits are of what they're capable of learning very quickly. One more illustration of this, even the differences in the US. So we have a trustee at Olin who is a dear friend and in fact was on my PhD committee at Caltech when I was young. And he told me that early in his career, he was a professor at the US Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. This is a very elite place. You might know about this. You don't get into the military academies without having a recommendation from a member of Congress. So they have to have recommendations from the governor and from all sorts of people. A very elite group. But he told me that what he could teach at the Air Force Academy in 1 week, he could teach at Caltech in 1 day. 1 day, because of the preparation of the students at Caltech was so different from the preparation of the students in the Air Force Academy. And that's within 2 very elite institutions. So the curriculum that they developed at Caltech, which by the way, when I was a student there, we didn't have books. You didn't use books in graduate school. You re-derived all of the theories from scratch. That was you could not have done that, I don't think, at the University of Iowa, where I was the dean. So there are differences in institutions. It's basically why you need to be careful about just copying the curriculum down.
Okay. Sorry for my internet interruption. So shall we move to the next question? Sure. I could not. Okay. So Professor Amstel asks a question. You said preserve culture. What would be that? What would that be in Nepal in your view?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
You said preserve culture. What would be that be in Nepal in your view? That's
Well,
by.
Yeah. Number one, I don't know enough about Nepal. I'm sorry, I can't be an expert there to tell you what it is you need to say. You will know this, I'm sure. I think there are a number of things, for example, in America that I can talk about that we should change, that we would not want to preserve. One of the things about America, I believe, is that we have the most culturally deprived people on the planet. And I would say that because very few of them have a passport to have gone to another country. If you look at the news in America, they will spend 30 minutes talking about national news. And I'm going to say 1 minute talking about what happened in any other country. Americans don't know anything about the rest of the world. They need to get out of the US and go see what it looks like in the other countries. This is not a very strong cultural value in the US. And I think it's absolutely essential, even to the future of the companies here. Like, for example, IBM. I have some very good friends who at IBM, and they hire about 25,000 engineers a year, and about 5,000 of them are from the US. And they'll tell me one of their largest growing markets is in China. If you're going to work at IBM, there's a high likelihood that you're going to be asked to relocate to China. Being successful in China requires you to understand the culture in China. You have to earn the trust of the people that you're working with. You have to earn the respect of the people that you're working with. There's a very famous example of this in another company, not IBM, that was doing work in Spain. I think this was a construction firm, and they were multinational working together. And the American people went there, and they didn't understand that there's a culture in Spain called a siesta in the afternoon, and that they have dinner late at night. Maybe it's not starting until 9 o'clock at night. And as a result of this, there was this friction and this sense of disrespect for the Spanish because they were not working hard enough, right? Because they're taking this nap. Well, that's a cultural value in Spain that served them well for centuries. And you're not going to come in and change that as an American consultant. You need to understand what they do, value it, and realize it's there for a purpose, and try to understand it. And if you're going to create a university and you have a schedule and a curriculum that doesn't respect, for example, your national holidays, whatever religious views that your people have, should be built in, and it should be given a position of respect. Don't tell them that we have to abandon our cultural beliefs and our religion in order to become a world-class university. That's a terrible idea. It won't work, number one. You should build up the culture and the values and the beliefs of your people. So many things that you do are world-class already. Don't forget that.
Thank you. The next question is resource generation in our part of world in higher education is not so common, as they are either government funded or private. How do you think this could be initiated for AMBAST, Madan Mandari University of Science and Technology, in the context that we plan to support the students for studies? And I'll add another question from Professor Joshi. What are the key challenges for public universities?
Yeah, this is really difficult. Again, I don't have enough context knowledge to understand what's the best path forward. Resources is very important. Olin did not have this problem when we started. We had a founder from a private foundation who had a strong belief in what we were doing and said that if it's worth doing right, correctly. Don't cut corners, okay? If you're going to start over, then do whatever's necessary to make it possible for this to work out. So we did not have the problem in the first couple of years of worrying about where the money would come from. But most people do, and most people have to make choices early. It's more important to worry about admission than it is to worry about buildings, or it's more important to worry about having a famous faculty member than it is to worry about having the right kind of laboratory equipment. These are difficult choices, and I don't have answers for this. Also, it's important to be a little bit fortunate. I can say one thing about the people, because I believe if you get the right people, in a way, other things will take care of themselves. If you don't get the right people, nothing matters. Okay, I don't care how much money you have. So who are the right people, right? That's the big question. If you're going to create an institution marked by excellence and by experimentation and by innovation and entrepreneurship, you want people who are open to change, people who are willing to try things that are new, people who are not followers who just want to say, I'm better because my resume is longer than your resume. It's not about resume, it's about people. So when we first started, there was a lot of explanation in the New York Times and other places. The largest gift in American history to start a new institution is at Olin College. They're going to start next year. We got lots of applications. In fact, we had 140 applications for every faculty position that we hired. And then it grew from there. These were very well prepared people. I had worries about any faculty member who would actually do this because, you know, they probably want to win the Nobel Prize and they'd be better off to stay at MIT. It turns out 2 faculty members resigned from MIT to join us in the first year. 3 faculty members resigned from Vanderbilt University, including the Associate Dean of Engineering and the Chairman of the Electrical Engineering Department at Vanderbilt. These are not weak candidates. These are very strong candidates. And then we had some who were very well known for their interest in a particular kind of curricular innovation, like writing across the curriculum or integrated course blocks in the first 2 years, this sort of thing. We didn't hire any of them. And the reason is they were too rigid in their views. They had been living in a very tough political environment where they couldn't get their university to make the changes that they wanted to see. And every year that went by, they became more committed to this change and it became their identity. If we only do this one thing, the world will be perfect. And they were not open to other ideas. So I knew what would happen. If we hired them in the first year, there would be this giant fight among them. And the youngest and the most vigorous one would win and the rest would leave. And then we'd have one idea, whoever that one person was. So we opted instead to largely get young people, people who who were really, really bright, but people who had not had the experience in 25 years of trying to change curriculum. And they were open-minded. And we told them, in fact, we had a strategic plan and we called Invention 2000. The plan came out in 2000. It was not a plan. It was a set of expectations for how to go about creating a new institution. There were 4 steps. The first step is what we called discovery. We went to 30 different universities and 20 corporations and talked to them about the future of education and the future of engineering, because we wanted this university to be connected to the corporations and the rest of the world. Number 2, after we had done the discovery, which took about a year, by the way, we then had a process called invention. In invention, we basically took these young people, about a dozen of them, locked them up in a hotel for a weekend and told them, don't come out until you have a blueprint for how we could start this school. What are the bold goals that we want every student to meet? And that was a little bit risky, but you know, I had a blueprint that I had written out in detail that I gave to the Board of Trustees before they hired me. I called it the white paper, and I put it in a drawer and I didn't show it to anybody. Because the kind of people who will follow directions and do exactly what they tell are the wrong people. So instead, I told them, you're going to invent the curriculum and it's going to be better than what I have. And if it's not, I can always pull this paper out of the drawer and we'll start over. They didn't disappoint me. They exceeded all expectations. In fact, their curriculum was presented as a 3-act play that could go on Broadway. And the person who wrote this was a professor of humanities and arts at Olin, who was brilliant. He also has an undergraduate degree in engineering from MIT. The kinds of people that you don't want are the kinds of people who are judgmental and condescending and more senior. So if a young faculty member says, you know, I've always thought that mathematics shouldn't be separated from engineering, it should be taught in the room at the same time. We should have a faculty member in engineering and a faculty member in mathematics together as a team. And we should expand the size of the course so that they do both of these things at the same time. And maybe we should also include engineering projects. So they use this to build something and they learn by building it. And the worst thing you could find is a faculty member from another institution rolls his eyes and says, you know, we tried that back in 2000 and it doesn't work. Next question. And you've just silenced this person. He'll never bring up a good idea again. And plus you have this, you know, the senior faculty members up there and the junior faculty members down here. So he's kind of worried about being judged and you won't get any new ideas after that. Then you'll just follow things. So finding the right attitudes and openness and playfulness and creativity is hard. And the way we did it was extensive recruiting. And I'll just tell you one thing about the way we do recruiting now. Faculty. I told you about Candidates Weekend with students. We brought in 75 kids at once, and we put them on teams of 5, and they stay together as a group of 5 for the whole weekend. And they work on 3 things. They worked on building something together. Our students come up with a design project with the kids who are the candidates have to design on their own. And so we watch them. They often don't have enough materials. They have to improvise. They compete with each other for a silly prize, a styrofoam trophy of some kind. And they clap for each other at lunch. Then we ask them to do difficult things. We give them a question they pull out of a hat. Now, these are old. We don't do this today, but this is what we did a few years ago. So question like, what do you think the reasons were for the Iraq War? This is not about engineering. And we tell them, you group of 5 students have 20 minutes to talk about this. And then you're going to make a presentation to us about the Iraq War. And every person on your team has to speak. Oh, and we're going to sit in the back of the room and watch you talk about this. And by the way, a $100,000 scholarship depends on how well you guys do, right? So this reveals a great deal about their willingness to be partners with other students. Is this about trying to show everybody that I'm smarter than you are? Do I want you to fail so I can win? By the way, I'm introverted and I'm not comfortable standing in front of a group, but I still have to talk. How am I going to deal with this? And then at the end, we ask them, what are your passions in life? We want to know what really matters to you. What do you think does it mean to live a good life? Does it mean getting rich? Does it mean being powerful? Does it mean making a better world? Tell us about that. What's the most important thing to you? So we really get to know who the kids are. And then this is why we wind up having people tell us, I've never worked this hard in my life and there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. It's not a school, it's a cause. You have to have faculty to do the same thing. So a year or so ago, we recruited faculty with a candidates week. This is outrageous. We brought 16 faculty candidates in at the same time. They were not interviewed by the research talk at a department. We brought them in and put them on interdisciplinary teams. They never met each other. And by the way, they're competing for the same job. And we asked 30 students who volunteered to come in for that week and work with these candidate faculty members on a pedagogical design problem. How can you make our senior project more effective? And then we just watched. And I thought it was going to fail. I was very nervous about this. I said, man, if I'm at MIT and I have a PhD student that's just graduating, I'm going to tell them don't go to Olin because this is crazy. You're going to get embarrassed and this is like very awkward. They don't know what they're doing. Turns out it was the best yield we'd ever had. We had 16 candidates there. We only had 4 slots. We could only hire 4 of them. We wound up, the provost was so impressed, he stretched it out. He talked to some people who were retiring and we hired 7 of them. But some of them had to wait a couple of years for the position to open. They are bonded together in ways that no one else could have imagined. But it's interdisciplinary because it's who we are. So what we did is we asked faculty candidates to show us how they do what Olin expects you to do. Not just give us your research talk from Berkeley. And it's very revealing. So getting the right people, as I'm saying many times here in different layers, is the hardest thing to do. I think of the resources as the tools you use to get the right people. If you can get the right people with no resources, you don't need the resources. Resources are a fringe benefit that will come later because these people will change the world. The people you bring in who come there because they're motivated to make Nepal a country that you can't even imagine will be so much more successful than it is today. Reputation will follow you. People will, from around the region, want to know what you're doing. And it'll be driven by the passion and the commitment of the people that you bring in at the beginning.
So the next question is, what do you think is the value of liberal arts education in making better engineers by Arjun Kaki. And I'll add another question. How do you think the teaching pedagogy will change and evolve in this age of artificial intelligence and Internet of Things by Dr. Sangeeta Singh?
Yeah, those are two very big questions. I personally believe that the distinction between arts and humanities and science and engineering is unfortunate, and it has been largely detrimental to the education that we provide, both for the well-being of the students and also for the effectiveness of the curriculum. I mentioned a little bit before in this example, this kind of detailed example about designing this carpet that could determine the weight of people who came in. You could not have done that without having had effective preliminary interviews with these 20 people. By the way, I would not recommend taking 5 randomly selected kids from K-12 schools in Nepal and sending them into a nursing home and having them talk to adults for 2 hours. They need some guidance, okay? We didn't do that either. We have an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist as part of our faculty, and she was part of the team that helped prepare the students to learn about what we call qualitative research in social science, which is an art to how you have conversations with people and how you learn from them. And so they were basically trained by an anthropologist who's embedded in this team of design thinking for creating a better world. If you have an engineering program that is developed specifically for what we call human-centered engineering. So it starts with people, you interview the client, and it ends with people. You come back and you talk to them about whether they appreciate and want the design that you're creating. If you don't do both of those things, you're going to be very disappointed. So you can't do that without integrating people. There's a very good research report on this that just came out about a year ago from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. It's called Branches from the Same Tree. It was a committee of 18 or 20. It was chaired by the former president of Cornell University, who's himself a cardiologist in the medical school, that explains why, in some detail, integrating arts and humanities into science and mathematics and not separating them is a much more effective way. So I could spend too much time talking about this. The other question had to do with AI, right? And it's clear that AI is not going away, that it's a very important thing. I believe it's going to change a lot because of the dangers that the unintended consequences of these power tools are beginning to show up, as I mentioned in the talk. MIT, for example, recently started a $1 billion project called the Schwarzman College of Computing. And it's not part of the School of Engineering, it's institute-wide, and they're worried about the societal implications of AI, how it's going to change the world. There is probably the quickest way, there's an article in the Atlantic magazine from about a year ago that's authored by 3 people, including Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State of the US, Dan Huttenlocher, who is the founding dean of the Schwarzman College at MIT, and I can't remember the fellow's name, who is a senior executive at Google, I think. And the 3 of them are talking about how AI is a two-edged sword. It's going to create power tools for doing things we couldn't do before. It's also going to create risks for destabilizing the world that we've not seen before. And of course, those of us who prepare engineers, so let me just tell you one little story about this. I was helping to teach a course at Olin, and I had some students who were about to graduate, and they came up to me. This was a course in ethics. And the student said, I have a job offer, 2 job offers. This is like 5 or 6 years ago. One is from a company called Raytheon, and Raytheon is a major military contractor in the US. They want to make radar. Another one is from Google. But Google is telling me their mission is to end loneliness in the world. They say that one of the biggest concerns about human happiness is being lonely, particularly when mobility happens in Nepalese graduates leave and they go to Italy or they go to Brazil or they go to the US and they don't see their parents anymore. So how to keep them from being lonely? Well, Google has this vision. They're going to keep track of all your high school classmates, and they're going to tell you without you asking, hey, your high school classmate is at the Starbucks around the corner, so you should go talk to him. And so I'm going to go work for Google because their mission is to make a better world, where Raytheon is evil, right? It's about defense. But now, 5 years later, with all of the revelations about the surveillance economy and how Google makes their money, you may think that Facebook exists because it provides an opportunity for you to tell your most valued people about your innermost desires. Why? Well, I would say it this way. The psychologist Maslow, my summary of his work, this is the guy who did the hierarchy of human learning, says the most important thing in every person's life is to be the most important person in another person's life. And that's really hard to do in today's technical world where you move around all the time. But Facebook fixes that because it allows you to tell your personal story in very revealing ways to those you care about. So I think Facebook exists because it's meeting my human need to tell my story. And by the way, it doesn't even cost anything. So why wouldn't I use that? But that's not what Facebook thinks. Facebook, you never make a check to Facebook. Companies make a check to Facebook. And they make that check to them because they're getting surveillance information about your private habits. They know what you look at, what movies you see, what swear words you use. They know who the people are that you talk to in the dark of the night. And they sell that information to companies who pay them a lot of money for it. So Facebook is telling you that we're meeting your needs, but they're actually selling data to clients who are advertising in order to manipulate your behavior. Now that this is known, the same students graduate from this class and they're telling me, I'd rather work for Raytheon than for Google because I'm afraid Google is being dishonest about what they're doing. So it's complicated. Getting this correct, I think, is going to require more than algorithms in mathematics. It's going to require a lot of conversation about social well-being, about security, and about human rights. Who owns your data anyway? And how do you make sure that that becomes clear to the students that you work with? It's very hard to do because there's so much money right now. And even at Olin, I think half of Olin students go to work for the software industry.
Thank you. Thank you very much, valuable attendees. Due to time constraints, we could not accommodate all your questions. Thank you, Professor Miller, panelists, and our valuable attendees. Now we have come to the end of our session, and I would like to invite Professor Triratna Bhattacharya for his concluding remarks. Thank you.
Can I make one statement? Just one small request.
Yeah.
I can't figure out how to capture the wonderful comments that I'm seeing in the chat room and the questions because I'm on a panelist and a panelist doesn't have the ability to print this stuff out. If somebody could capture this and send it to me after the meeting, I would be very grateful. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's we will do. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Richard Miller. The talk was very, very, fruitful. Personally, I learned a lot from your presentations. Every year's slide has given message. Almost all all presentations have a very, very insightful knowledge. We learned a lot. Uh, uh, I was the dean for 4.5 years in the Institute of Engineering, Tribhuvan University. Then we so in how we managed to make our institutions a pioneer institution in Nepal. And later on, the many universities came, and they also started, offering engineering courses. So now one of the the expected world-class university is coming out. That is Madan Bhandari University of Science and Technology University. Uh, from this presentation, I think the officials, basically Professor Dr. Rajendra Joshi was also the dean of the institute again before. Uh, he could plan the way in such a way that the university become a very the qualitative one, and also served to the nation. From your presentation, personally, I am also given a responsibility to as a coordinator of making detailed project report for establishing three another constituent campuses in the in the country. Uh, mm, I'm doing that. You also said that don't rush to open the campus, for do experiment first, yeah. And the education, the engineering education is not a body, it's just a process. Say. That I like very much. Everything I think is a very fruitful for me. I believe it's our everyone is benefited from your presentations. I would like to thank you very much on behalf of the Nepal Engineers Association, on behalf of the Madan Bhandari University of Science and Technology, also the Nepal Engineering Council and the Association of Engineering Colleges Nepal, the organizers who are very benefited. We would like to thank you very much for your very fruitful presentation. We look forward to working with you in future days. At the same time, I would like to thank all the panelists and the attendees who have put the questions. Also, viewers in social media. This is also live in Facebook, in both Nepal Engineers Association Facebook page as well as Nepal Research Education Network Facebook page. There are so many viewers, and it is kept as a recorded video that later on maybe it can be retrieved and also listen to you and see their presentations. Once again, I would like to thank you all participants, especially Professor Richard Miller and also Professor Rajendra Joshi, Chairperson, Nepal Engineering Council, Delhi Raman Nirola, the General Secretary, Engineer Ramesh Srestha, who is General Secretary of ECON, and also Madan Bhandari University of Science and Technology family, Nepal Engineers Association family, and at the same time we got this technical support from Nepal Research Education Network, who is serving many of academic institutions by providing research facilities over here. This program is also supported by the NREN, Nepal Research Education. I would like to thank the NREN as well. Uh, Having said that, we would like to, we are looking forward to working with you. Thank you very much once again. And this is already evening is 9:15 in Nepal, but in US, I think it is a sunny day over here. It's around 10 o'clock, I believe. Yeah, in the morning. Yeah. Thank you much. Have a good day. Thank you very much. Okay. having said that, we will close the session. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Give applause.
Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you.